Hello everyone, welcome to History Dad. Today we're going to talk about China. Not all of the history of China, it's way too big. It's one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. We are going to talk about a small chunk. And I want to apologize right off the bat for my pronunciations. I do not speak Chinese, but I'm going to do my best and hopefully muddle through. We are going to talk about a period starting around 1792. This date is important because that is the date of a meeting, an embassy between Lord McCartney of Britain and the Qianlong Emperor of China. This was a big deal. People just didn't go and see the emperor, especially not foreigners. It just didn't happen. But McCartney was representing a large world empire, so he got the meeting. The purpose of the meeting was specifically trade. People have been trading with China for years. The Silk Road, it was a big place that people wanted things from. They wanted silk, they wanted tea, wanted porcelain. China had a lot of things people wanted. And McCartney wanted some trade concessions. He wanted to open it up. See, there were a couple schools of thought at this time. And Britain believed, as well as most of the West, we'll just say, including the United States, France, but Western Europe was all for the free market at this time. They believed that was the proper way to do trade in the world. It helped economies flow. It was the greatest thing ever, and they believed in it. China did not subscribe to this. They did not feel it was necessary. They had their system. They'd been using their system for hundreds of years. It was the good system. They were going to stick to it. McCartney's mission was to change China's mind, and he had some aces up his sleeve. He brought some things to try and impress them. One of the big things was cuckoo clocks. That's right. It may sound ridiculous, but cuckoo clocks were an excellent example of the mechanisms, the idea, the science of Western culture. This was a thing that he thought would impress the Chinese, and he brought to say, we have some things that you don't have that we think you would really want. Well, the meeting went badly to the point where the emperor was annoyed, and he actually sent a letter to England saying, guess what? We do not need your technological gizmos. We have no use for them. We don't want them. In fact, you should simply be thankful that we're trading with you at all. And sent McCartney on his way. This did not work for Britain. They were used to trading in goods. They would come, they would take your raw materials or goods in exchange. They would give you things they had made, things that their factories had turned out. This didn't work for China. China had no interest in it. If you wanted to get tea from China or silk, you paid in silver, period. Britain didn't like this. They had nothing that they could actually trade for in their mind and really make a good profit on the deal. They thought. It turns out they did have something. See, they had been colonizing India for years, along with several other European nations. But around 1757, the East India Company kind of took over some sections. And it dawned on them that they had opium, a lot of opium. Now, at this time, they started to ship opium everywhere. And worldwide, there's opium flying around now. And it wasn't just a Chinese issue. It was everywhere. If you're ever watching an old American Western and they're drinking or they prescribe laudanum, that's opium. It was everywhere. People were getting addicted everywhere. So what the British realized is they could introduce opium to China. And they did. They started using opium as their currency. Before long, any goods they wanted, they'd give opium. And before long, they were getting some of that silver back that they'd been giving to China in order to bring in opium. Well, the Chinese government realized this is a problem. Specifically, one guy, Lin Se-su. My pronunciations, they're not good. Anyway, this guy was a scholar and court official. And he talked to the emperor about it and said, this is a big problem. Our people are getting addicted. We need to do something about it. So he was given permission. He went off to do something about it. He did some smaller steps, dealing with some of the Chinese traders, confiscating their stuff, the opium pipes, all this stuff. Finally, he decided that wasn't working, and he wanted to go more to the source. So what he did was he confiscated well over 1 million pounds of opium and dumped it in the ocean. It was a brave move. But a country should have the right to look out for its citizens. Britain didn't really agree with this. They viewed this as the illegal seizure and destruction of their property. That set up the First Opium War. The British came in with a fleet of ships, sunk a bunch of Chinese ships. I believe they did some bombardment of ports and cities. And before long, the British won that war. And the Chinese had to basically sue for peace. And the result of this was the Treaty of Nanjing, or Nanking. This treaty fundamentally changed the relationship between Britain and China. As far as trade goes, okay, opium's still allowed, obviously, but it went from being one place they could trade it, in Canton, to 5 ports that were now treaty ports, where the British were allowed to come and trade. It made so they did not have to go through a government representative. They could trade with anyone. Any tariffs on British trade had to be fixed upon by both sides, or decided on by both sides, and the British weren't going for high tariffs. It made China pay Britain 21 million silver dollars in reparation for the opium they sunk and for the damage done. It gave Hong Kong to Britain as a protector, as they owned Hong Kong in perpetuity. Now, this eventually got sorted out in the 1980s, and China got Hong Kong back in 1997. Some of the most important things it did, it made, for example, any British citizen in China that committed a crime was not tried in Chinese courts. They were tried in British courts. It made it so in these cities, there were whole areas that were under British control. They were no longer China. They were Britain. After this treaty, it did not take long for the Americans and the French, the United States and the French, to come in and say, we want the same treaty. And you know what? They got it. China was in no shape at that point to fight a war with them either. So they got the same deals. A little bit after this was the First Sino-Japanese War, where Japan came in and fought a war with China. China lost, and Japan forced them to release their ownership or their claims to Korea. So for a little while it became a free Korean empire until Japan took it over a little bit later, I think in 1910. It forced them to give Taiwan to Japan and most of Manchuria, I believe, to Japan. This all became what was called semi-colonialism. A foreign power came in and militarily forced China to cede territory and the rule of that territory, really, to a foreign power. It started to make the Chinese second-class citizens. They could not win in any real disagreement against a foreigner. They had to give trade concessions to the left and to the right. It really was the beginning of horrible relations between foreign powers and China, with China being on the losing end. There is a classic Bruce Lee movie, Fist of Fury. One of the scenes in it is him about to enter a park in a Chinese city and him being stopped, and they point to a sign that says "No dogs or Chinese." Now, I don't know if that sign literally existed, but that sentiment existed. There were places in China the Chinese were not allowed to go. They were looked down as menial labor and in many ways less than human. You can see films now of British people, white people, being carried around literally by Chinese. This is just an example of how they were considered and held subservient. This led to a lot of animosity, and it led to a series of rebellions and revolutions starting in 1900 that I have to say were justified. They were being oppressed by the Europeans and the Japanese. There's no way about it. Okay. That's probably long enough for today. I hate when these videos go over 9 to 10 minutes. I will continue this story with the Boxer Rebellion. As usual, you guys have a good day. Go outside and do something. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.